a capital idea, democracy. We'll talk about it next on Off the Record. Hello and welcome to our program. This is a conversation about the news of the week. Joining me in our conversation, Mark Garrison, WBT Radio, Herb White, the Charlotte Post, Steve Crump, WBTV, Jim Morrill with the Charlotte Observer. Our good friend Jim Morrill last week said by Wednesday it would all be worked out in Washington.
He nailed
You were
it.
correct, sir.
Prophetic. How about that?
How about that?
Lucky guess. Lucky
No.
guess.
So help our viewers in the region kind of get up to speed with now. Where are we?
Well, we've cleared that hurdle, and it's a good thing because people were really feeling the effects of the shutdown, even here in North Carolina, at the state park, national parks out west, and with programs for the poor in Raleigh. People were feeling that, and what they've done, they agreed to a compromise, and it passed mainly with Democratic votes in Congress this week. But now they've essentially kicked the can down the road, as people like to say, and the next deadline is December 13th, Friday the 13th, for another budget deal, and then the debt ceiling is set to expire, I think, in February. So I have a feeling we could be seeing the same thing go on again.
It sure looks like it. It really does. President Obama is saying it will not happen again, but I think with Ted Cruz and the other Tea Party candidates there, we very well could see it happen again.
And I think the phrase that has kind of emerged through all this is governing by crisis. It's like one crisis to another because we had sequester, we've had a number of things related to the financial well-being, of the United States of America, and not just the impacts here, but also global markets as well.
Yeah.
So Herb, winners and losers from the politician side.
All losers. I think you get down to who lost less or least. Anyway, President Obama lost least, I guess. He got what he wanted by drawing his line in the sand this time and sticking with it. And I think the Senate bipartisanship works at least somewhat in half of one chamber of commerce. Losers, probably Ted Cruz, Tea Party, didn't get anything that it wanted. So there you go.
I think the Republican Party lost, too. I mean, their popularity rating in, I think, a Gallup poll went down to 24%, the lowest ever. And you saw a party divided. I mean, you had the moderates in Washington, you had the Tea Partiers, and so it's hard to see how those divisions end.
On the other hand, I'm not sure Ted Cruz is totally a loser, since all politicians are narcissists and self-promoters anyway.
Egomaniacs.
Egomaniacs. I mean, he now is a household name, which, depending on what his ultimate ambitions are in life politically, is a good thing for him from a political standpoint.
But you have to look at the fact that Cruz played to his base.
That's right.
That's the whole thing.
That's right.
He is elevated in the base. So the question becomes, how does he navigate, through the channels of the Tea Party to at least elevate him to the next level, which is it going to be 2016?
Because you're also talking about in 21st century America, you don't win anything on a large scale without coalition building. So Tea Party is fine, but what else can you put together to get a winning combination?
Jim?
You kind of wonder how much leverage the Tea Party and the Republicans have going into this next round of negotiations. I mean, it seems like they're not going to threaten another government shutdown because the results of this one for the party were pretty catastrophic. Divided the party, gave them bad press. So maybe that'll kind of focus them on coming to some kind of agreement, and the Obama administration is going to have to compromise on some things too, whether it's entitlement reform or something.
One thing they are clearly not, it's interesting how when we started this debate, changing Obamacare was the big thing. By the end of this, even Cruz had stopped talking about changing Obamacare, trying to get a delay in it.
And I'm sorry, Mark, but the big question is how much political as well as social capital do they have left?
Yeah.
In other words, considering that you got the 2014 elections coming up here, and we'll probably start, hearing the early shots, salvos being fired right after the Christmas holidays.
Right.
How much actual, leverage and capital do they have to run on?
Jim, when you talk about sort of national politics and the national parties, does that translate any more down at the state level and the local level?
Well, I think it does to an extent. I think that it will in the Senate race, for example, next year. I think that national politics will be a major factor. Already you've got the Republican candidates for the Senate all opposing the deal that was struck in Washington, even though that you had Republicans like Richard Burr and even Robert Pittenger from Charlotte voting for the deal that ended the shutdown. All the Republican Senate candidates are opposing it. On a lower level, when you get beyond that, congressional districts, as we've talked about, are pretty much set in stone. They're gerrymandered to the extent that they're not going to change very easily, nor are legislative districts. So I think in the Senate race, you might see some blowback.
And y'all have been in the business a long time. Voters have short memories. Does any of this carry over to someone made the reference that everybody's up, in terms of the congressional seats on the House side? When they come around, just, if there's a Republican in, go the other way. If there's a Democrat in, go there. Just have a whole fruit basket turnover in that process.
Most of us around this table work with Bob Inman. And Bob used to have this saying when it came campaign season, which was, quote, throw the rascals out. And the question becomes is, as you mentioned, the public memory is very, very short. But at the same time, with these ads, I'm sure that, that the folks at the ad agencies around the country were probably grabbing every, sad-looking face of an elected official.
Every soundbite
known to man.
Yeah.
So all they'll have to do is go to YouTube or whatever.
Sure.
They have a whole arsenal of those kinds of things.
But unless we have another shutdown in December or January, I'm not sure that it's going to play that much as a factor in the next election.
Well, but the other side of that is you're talking about February, and let's not kid ourselves. More than likely, there'll be some very hard negotiations going on towards that time of the year, which plays right into that narrative of memory. And when November or even May rolls around for primaries, that will still be fairly fresh with folks.
If it happens again. It happens again.
But I would put my money on, at some point in time, there's going to be some drama with this. And whether you have a short memory or not, it will almost be irrelevant because it will be right there and you will just be getting that into the rearview mirror.
But a wild card in all of this, I think, is Obamacare. And if it continues to be a disaster in the rollout with the computer system, which it has been, even Debbie Wasserman Schultz says, we have to be honest, this has not gone well. So with even Democrats saying it's been a disaster, if it gets worse, as you move into the first part of next year, it may very well be that will play into the Republicans' hands and actually have more of an impact than the shutdown did, because everybody has got to have insurance by next year or face a penalty on their taxes.
The other thing, though, is the subplot that came as a result of getting the government up and running again, which is the level of pork. That kind of got the bill attachments and the addendums and all that. There may not be a bridge to nowhere, but there are some people that manage to feather their own nest.
And Jim, you reported on and mentioned in our program already how the states sort of began to respond, putting up money to open up the parks. I think Tennessee and North Carolina got together and did that. Governor McCrory was back in Charlotte, where he was the mayor this week with the food bank announcement. What do you make of sort of the state's response to the shutdown?
Well, the state got affected by this shutdown. I think North Carolina was the only state to end payments. Was it WIC or was it one of the programs for the poor?
WIC.
Where they stopped getting federal money, but other states managed to come up with something, and North Carolina did in the end. But that was one of a very visible effect for them, and I think it kind of threw McCrory for a loop a little bit
in terms of how to respond.
Yeah, and so the food bank was an easy fix for him. They were able to give some money that I think had already been allocated to the food bank.
And
just as a side note, the whole WIC thing needs some investigation by some serious journalists, because it was interesting to me that everybody cried that the sky was falling because of WIC, and then all of a sudden these states kept coming up with money to keep WIC going. And you did a little digging and come to find out Nestle, which is a big supplier of infant formula, had been giving rebates to the states, and all of a sudden the states were like, oh yeah, well, we've got money to do this. Well, what's been happening to that Nestle money up until now? I think I'd like to know a little more about that.
In the press conference Steve alluded to, and maybe it was just the setting, but it just appeared to me that Governor McCrory did not look as fresh as I've seen him in other video press conference events. So Jim, how's he doing sort of 10 months into his first term?
Well, there was a new poll that just came out this week that showed that his fall had been stabilized, apparently, but that's not necessarily good news, because I think it was 37% of voters in North Carolina still have a negative, he only has a positive rating from about 37%. More than half the people disapprove of the way he's run the governor's office. And he's had a run of bad press lately. I mean, there was a 9-hour hearing the other day with his DHS secretary, Eldona Vosh. There have been a lot of things wrong with in her department, or the bad press that have come out of there, including the salaries of some of her workers and the way that the Medicare program is being run. So, he's been on the defensive a lot more than he expected to be.
And doctors' offices across the state are still fuming over the computer system. Some of them are still not getting paid on Medicaid reimbursement. I have a feeling in the next year or so, Vosh is going to have to disappear. I think McCrory is going to be forced in a position to kind of nudge her out.
Disappear
There's
her?
just too much going on in her department giving him negative press.
Steve, you've covered McCrory a long time.
Yeah.
And you've covered him in both settings.
Well, and it's kind of interesting because I don't think the house over on Maryland Avenue would have gotten $230,000 and up
Bathroom fixes.
But, when you look at what's occurred in the governor's mansion and the fact that I don't think that he was expecting, a lot of negative, publicity to come out of that as it looked, towards the renovations in the mansion. Okay. And I think when you look at it from a number standpoint, where you have some of the people who had their unemployment benefits, checks reduced by $150 a week, which could have been another, bag of groceries or a tank of gas to help them find work, and you see that. It's kind of an interesting,
he moved quickly. We had a press release almost instantly early last Saturday morning after a News
AP
and Observer story, or it was an AP story on Friday that they were going to spend all this money on bathrooms in the governor's mansion.
So, Herb, it really points to the idea that in the governor's office, all of those decisions get magnified.
Yeah, and this is North Carolina's ultimate goldfish bowl. So what you do here, no matter how innocuous it may appear to you, we're just fixing up the bathrooms for Pete's sake. Well, but you're doing that with government money, with taxpayer dollars. And so it kind of magnifies itself, and it's not a very good look on the governor right now.
Well, and the other thing is with Roy Cooper emerging, could McCrory be a one-termer?
Yeah, that's the hammer out there. And they both will have records to run on when election time rolls around.
Jim, what do you think about, McCrory? We're early and we're 10 months in.
Yeah, it's way early to talk about one-term governor, but you do have a Democrat out very early. Roy Cooper has been wooed, as we've talked about. He's been wooed for running for governor for years and years, and now that he's finally out there aggressively pursuing it, that tells you something. And at the same time, you're hearing some Republicans kind of privately grumble, and some not so privately grumble about the administration, because they're getting a black eye from some of this too.
Yeah, Mark, too early to sort of be forecasting?
I think it's a very interesting question, and I think it is certainly possible he could be a one-termer. But if he is a one-termer, I also think the Democrats may get the legislature back, or at least one house of it. I don't think it would be just throw McCrory out. I think there would be wholesale changes if McCrory.
Well, and then that goes back to the whole thing we brought up earlier, as far as gerrymandering in the state as it relates to the elective districts and the way they've been drawn. And who was responsible for that? Mr. Rucho.
Mm-hmm. Jim, we had a huge story coming out of the legislature. It was a decision by Ruth Samuelson deciding not to continue beyond the term that she's in. You were surprised?
I was surprised. I think a lot of people were surprised. Ruth had become a very powerful Republican legislator. She and Speaker Tillis, who's also from Mecklenburg County, were partners. She was the head of the Republican conference. More than that, she'd raised a lot of money for Republican candidates, and so a lot of the reason for the Republican power in the House can be traced back to her. But she also took a very visible role in a lot of issues in Raleigh this year. And she was on a path to be Speaker. She said she wasn't aggressively pursuing it, but she was one of the small group of candidates who could have gotten it.
So you think just the magnitude of the issues, or it wasn't what it was all cracked up to be?
Well, only she knows the real reason. I take her at her word that she and her husband decided they just wanted to go in a different direction with their life. She's talked about having another job possibility in things that she likes, like philanthropy, that would interest her. So maybe she just took a different direction.
But at the same time, she didn't have a lot of friends at the end of the airport debacle here. And she was kind of the lead person on the House side that basically talked to the press, introduced the legislation, had a number of conversations with Patsy Kinsey as all that was happening. So, I don't know what the fallout is here in Mecklenburg County.
And it really started with Representative Brawley, and I guess Ruth Samuelson sort of picked it up as it was going down the line.
What, the airport?
Yeah.
Well, she was a co-sponsor of the bill from the get-go, and she wasn't the main ringleader of it. That was Bob Ridgeo and Brawley, but she was involved in a lot of things, that were controversial: airport, abortion, voting.
Yeah. So if you look at her career in the legislature, she's been sort of benign from criticism for a number of years, and now all of a sudden she's become a lightning rod, and that may have just been more than she wanted to handle.
Well, and the other thing, for those of us that remember Ruth when she was on the Mecklenburg County Commission, she was a consensus builder, and you go from consensus building to just abject polarization. Quite obviously, you're going to have those kinds of issues.
Yeah, and I think that there's a very keen sense in some circles that Representative Samuelson sold Charlotte out, and when you are thought of that way, that does, unless you've got a very thick skin, that will come back and give you cause to pause.
No, I don't know how many of her constituents, again, it gets back to, we've talked so much on this program about does the average person really care who runs the airport? And so I'm not sure that many of her constituents would have been all jacked up against her over the airport.
Yeah, but you had
fingerprints.
You had fingerprints near the body, Mark. Her handprints were all over that.
I understand that. They know. I'm just not sure that. I don't know. I think there's something more here. But I think in general, she didn't like all the criticism, and I think it may be a case of kitchen's a little too hot. You just step
you made a
out.
good point about consensus politics here in Charlotte, Mecklenburg, and she was on the county commission, and I think you see the same thing with McCrory to some extent. Raleigh is a different ball game. The legislature is very partisan, very contentious. State politics ain't beanball. Like it is in Charlotte a lot of times, and it's not the same playing field.
Yeah, moderation will get you onto the back bench in Raleigh.
Well, yeah, and then you kind of look at it, basically where, you had a situation like, nationally people talk about how Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan were able to get along. And then, basically you had, scenarios where you had the consensus building from a, Mickey Michaud or Dan Blue with Jim Martin. So, you have those kinds of things.
Jim, we referenced the last couple of minutes the airport. I guess at the end of last week, over the weekend, a surprise to me, there was sort of an open letter from Jerry Orr. I can't recall that happening in the Observer that often, where he penned a letter. And also part of the conversation is he's now formally said he would retire 2015.
Right, that's new. He hadn't. First, he has to get back.
Right, I understand.
Back into
I understand.
the commission, although he still is on the payroll.
That's
so
right.
he could stay on the payroll and retire. But
right.
Yeah, that was new. And now, as we speak, this is still in court, and whether the commission will actually come to pass. I think they've had a meeting already.
They got one in November.
One scheduled in
November.
November.
That's right.
Maybe a meet and greet, Steve.
That's
perhaps.
got to be an interesting meeting. Sit around and drink coffee, and you've got no authority to do anything, but you're the authority, so you just show up and meet.
Herb?
I don't understand this. I really don't. But to the earlier point, I think that Mr. Orr deciding that he's going to give it up at some point down the road, sooner rather than later, I think that it's about time. And some would argue that it's past time.
And it certainly at least positions, if the commission gets in play, that issue's already on the table. He's already
got to find a.
He's already said
successor.
that. Now we begin the process. He said he would like to stay through June 2015. We'll begin the process for the.
So
certain
ultimately,
process.
the commission is already on the clock in terms of finding a successor, if it ever comes to be.
It's funny. I think one of the reasons this whole thing started was over the question of his successor. When U.S. Airways representative went to see then manager Kurt Walton, 2012, late 2011. It was about, they wanted a Roland Jerry's successor, and everything has happened since then, and now he's talking about finally retiring.
Yeah. We've got about 5 minutes left. Let's shift over to the mayor's race. Couple weeks to go. Early voting started Thursday of this week. Jim?
Still kind of a ho-hum affair. It's very quiet. I mean, neither candidate is making a lot of charges. The primary was a little bit more lively than the general election so far.
Yeah, and they got some debates coming up, and
Yeah.
y'all are hosting one next week.
The Observer has one next week, and WTVI has one the week after that.
Yeah, so maybe we'll get a glimpse as they kind of hone in terms of their messaging. I guess the key, I pulled some numbers from 2 years ago. The key is going to be the unaffiliated voters. Steve?
Yeah, I think so, and that's perhaps something that could help Peacock. But the reality is Cannon has been at it a lot longer, and I think that's primarily why he did so well against Mitchell, is the fact that he had a strong citywide organization. In fact, I was assigned that evening to the precinct at First Ward and got there, and there was like 4 or 5 people with Cannon shirts on and folks driving them in. So, he quite obviously has a get out the vote effort. But I also think, too, when you kind of look at the way the boxes break, in terms of, Cannon will obviously win the urban boxes, but when you look towards District 6 and 7, and turnout will be a factor. I mean, we had, 6%, I think, for the primary. I mean, will it be 10%?
It was 16 2 years ago.
Plus, with
my numbers
he's got
are right.
such a Democratic registration advantage. I just don't see
and
Peacock
the Democratic demographics.
doing anything. Yeah, exactly.
Well, Peacock really has to excite not only Republicans but independents. I mean, if the independents are a key, they're a key for Peacock.
We're getting into the fourth quarter. If he hasn't started throwing the long ball to get somebody excited yet, he's running out of time here.
Yeah, but does he have a Hail Mary somewhere?
No,
Well,
I don't think so. I think that's the problem. I think we said a couple of weeks ago he needs to pull out some kind of grenade. Unfortunately, there's not one that will really get people excited.
Which brings me to Jim. You did that story where you had the lunch with Harvey Gantt and the other Peacock.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering if you were able to gauge anything and the second generation Peacock running for mayor as a result of the conversation that you had.
Well, Ed Peacock, his father, said that the key now is independent votes. And I think that the implication is that's where Edwin needs to work. But it's a different city now.
Mm-hmm.
And Jim alluded to that in the article. comparing that 83
Oh,
to
yeah.
2013.
Right,
it was
right.
it was a very stark contrast. Herb, we're going to sports now.
Oh, okay.
The Bobcats are 3-2. They won a game, a preseason game, Thursday in the arena. So a little forecast of how that looks.
It means nothing.
Absolutely
nothing.
Okay.
What they need to do is, this is obviously a work in progress, and they are playing much better preseason wise as opposed to last season. This will be a significantly better team. How much that translates into wins, though, is the open question.
Which tees them up for the next season, which is back to the Hornets. So this is
We'll see Hugo back.
this is an important season for them with their season ticket holders
It
as
is.
they sort of get that psyche going.
And I think what you're going to see this season is probably it's going to be a season of rebranding. I mean, I don't think that they're going to write the season off in terms of, it's like, here's how many games we lose or whatever. No. Everybody's talking about, the whole bring back the buzz, philosophy. And I think perhaps that, this may be kind of a precursor for that.
Mark, can you bring it back that far? I mean, that was a magical moment. It was a single.
It was
a single pro sports franchise city at that time.
Yeah. And I think back even in my own family, my kids were always wanting me to get Hornets tickets and go to the games, and now they're all a little older and they're yawning over the prospects. I don't. I think you can bring it back for a little while, but long term, if you're not winning,
Forget it.
That's it.
That's right. You got to win.
You got to have a winning product on the floor.
And Charlotte is
No
a
matter
very
what you call
different
them.
city now from 1987 when the Hornets first debuted. The city's more sophisticated. You've got people who've come in from other parts of
That's
the country
right.
who are accustomed to different attitudes in terms of
Absolutely.
sports and life in general. So if you don't win, that's the only thing that brings people together.
So who gets to the playoffs first, the Panthers or the Bobcat Hornets?
I don't know, but I sure have
Panthers,
to
I
eat
think.
crow after last week because I think I said on here, oh, the Panthers will get annihilated last week.
I think you did say that.
And I did say that. And I watched that game and I kept going, what team is this? I don't even recognize these people. I mean, it was unbelievable.
Well, give them till this week and see if there's another result.
Yeah, that's
So,
true.
so I guess that is part of the equation. They're 2 and 3, and it's sort of the which team is going to show up and play.
Right,
Yeah.
right,
and,
right.
and when they show up and play, they show up and play.
Yeah. And,
Final thoughts, Steve? You picking
well,
them?
the question is, when do they go for 2 in a row? You know, like 2 wins in a row.
I got you. Was it St. Louis? Is it this week?
Yes.
You saying yes?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, Steve?
Maybe.
Maybe.
yeah.
Oh, well,
I'm still not so sure.
okay, Herb.
But I hope.
Yeah. Make it 2 in a row.
Make it 2 in a row.
Yeah.
All right. Well, on that note, as we always close, we feel better having had the conversation. let me thank our 4 guests: Mark Garrison, WBT Radio; Herb White, the Charlotte Post; Steve Crump, WBTV; Jim Morrill with the Charlotte Observer. Hope you've enjoyed our conversation. A couple of program reminders. One, Carolina Impact, 8 o'clock on Thursday night with Amy Burkett. Then on the 31st, a special mayoral debate, Edwin Peacock, Patrick Cannon. Hope you'll join us for that. In the meantime, we hope to see you next week for Off the Record here on PBS Charlotte. Good night, everyone.